So will we just remind anybody that might have forgotten how somebody forgot your name and called you Colin at a party?
Well, did they forget my name or never knew my name in the first place?
Mixed you up anyway, but called you Colin, and so how you decided that this was a huge insult, and it was a name that wasn't cool enough for you, etc., etc. And at the time, I told the story. I said, if anybody sees one of those Coca-Cola cans with Colin written on it, could they please drop it into me, or a bottle?
Yeah.
So I got a message the other evening from this guy who said, I have one. Do you still want it? And I said, yes, please. I'm really happy to get that. And the poor guy comes down to deliver it into the office on, his break on his shift, okay?
Yeah.
And sends it into the office. So anyway, I come in, no sign of the thing, and I'm sitting up at my desk, and one of the guys from utilities in the building comes up to me, sidles up to me, and says, by the way, a very suspicious parcel.
So this is what happens when you work on this sort of outlet, that even the most innocent of gifts and the most thoughtful and kind of gifts are treated as if they may explode.
Maybe an incendiary device. So they had made the decision that this was such an unusual item for me to get, that they examined the seal to check was the seal gone. And eventually the thing had to be destroyed. So Colin, actual Colin, I'm really sorry, but I don't think his name was Colin, but he found the Colin thing.
Yeah.
Really nice guy who went to do that. I'm really sorry, but they obviously... But there was worse one time, wasn't there? There was worse.
Yes.
Somebody tried to send me flowers.
Which was really treated as a major security incident.
We'll tell that story another time, really.
But basically...
That is a funny story, but anyway.
Basically, they're more comfortable getting abusive messages than pleasant.
Yeah. So the Colin, would try again, maybe.
Try again.
Yeah, but I really do
appreciate... Put a sign, this will not explode.
This will not explode. I really do appreciate that, the attempts to... And I wanted to hand it over to you and everything. Yeah, foiled. Anyway, we just had to explain ourselves there, because I'm sure that chap was wondering.
The thought was appreciated.
The thought was very appreciated. Now...
Go on, segue into Bomber there from that.
Okay.
Speaking of people who are known better by their nicknames...
No, that's crap. Is that all you can come up with?
I don't know.
It's better to not do
You're
that.
the presenter. If I was presenting this episode, I would have come up with something brilliant.
Yeah, no, I have nothing brilliant. But Bomber, now that we're talking about him, Bomber Kavanagh, right? So Bomber Kavanagh is in jail in the UK. In jail for this big drug conspiracy plot. I covered that case in Ipswich Crown Court. What is it, 3 years ago now?
3 years ago,
now. Okay. And then I went over to London to the Old Bailey to cover when this sort of guns plot that he had concocted in order to try and get himself a lower sentence for the drugs. And while he was in prison, this plot to basically buy guns, bury them and hand them over to the police so he could get a lesser sentence. So he was back in court for that. He got another few years slapped on a sentence and all the rest of it. But all the while I was very interested in this proceeds of crime case, that at the end of the sentence in Ipswich, in 21, he was told, along with his co-accused Gary Vickery and Daniel Cannings, that they had to provide the court with a full list of their assets. And that was so as the court could decipher what the proceeds of crime, what demand was going to be made on them for the proceeds of crime. So the way I understand it in the UK, they draw up the list of assets and they can come to an agreement that a individual can pay the money equivalent of that, or the assets are sold.
Yeah, it sort of seems to be wrapped into the same proceedings effectively in a way, where obviously in an Irish case, if somebody is convicted of, anything to do with criminality, if the state through the Criminal Assets Bureau want to bring a case, it begins again from scratch. Where in the UK, it seems to be that, for example, in Bomber Kavanagh's case, that because he's proven to be a drug trafficker, that level of proof is allowed to be brought straight into the proceeds of crime case. Slightly different than Ireland.
The end of it. It seems that anybody who gets a conviction, there immediately is this proceeds of crime against them. And that's where the investigation begins. But they don't seem to be proactively rather going after people who don't have convictions, which is different here because you often see people coming before the High Court on proceeds of crime cases who don't actually have convictions. They have been identified by local profilers or whatever.
Yeah, and even if you are convicted of gangland offences, if the state does want to bring something to do with your assets, it has to begin from scratch effectively.
Yeah. So at that point that proceeds of crime case was announced and sort of launched, I suppose, against them, I knew a couple of things from some investigations I'd done. First of all, I knew that Bomber Kavanagh had been living in this gated mansion in Tamworth because I had been there in 2015 while investigating his activities. I knew that when there had been police raids on that property over the course of the investigation into his involvement in this conspiracy to import drugs and weapons into the UK, that they had found a phenomenal amount of designer gear, including like 150 something pairs of jeans, Versace jeans or one of those makes. There was like an absolute, I mean, in a lifetime you couldn't wear the amount of stuff there was. There was handbags, designer handbags stuffed down the back of couches, and there was cash in various currencies stuffed into those, totaling God knows what. And I did know as well that there was store cards, which are like if you've a Brown Thomas card or Arnott's or whatever, you put your points on, and it means that you get invited along to fashion shows or you get a few bob off something. It's a bit like a Tesco card for normal people.
Right, okay.
I personally have a Brown Thomas card, but every time I buy something there, I say to them in Brown Thomas, there's not really any point in me putting the points on this because I don't spend enough here. But the Kavanaghs did spend a lot in these high-end stores, collected their points, I was told, on these store cards, and it was eye-watering, the spend. So now we're coming to a place, and sorry, Gary Vickery, the co-accused, I had also done an investigation into his, lifestyle before he was returned to the UK he pleaded guilty ultimately to this drug conspiracy, but he had been in Lanzarote. And I had discovered that he was there with his wife and that they had a number of companies, some of them based in mainland Spain, that he was advertising for rent a Sunseeker
yacht.
Yeah, well, no, not a yacht. It's a speedboat thing.
Yeah.
It's the one that was on the James Bond movie.
Right.
Yeah, it's a Quantum Sunseeker Superhawk, and it was in the Quantum of Solace movie. Yeah. So it was worth about 250,000 from memory, and he had bought it, and he had sort of claimed to have bought it when, if you remember, during COVID, a lot of tourism sort of collapsed, and I think a local businessman had got into a little bit of trouble because he had these assets that were no longer being used, and Vickery had moved in and purchased them, or certainly there was a sort of an ongoing row in the background about the legality of the purchase and everything. But nonetheless, he was advertising that he owned this Sunseeker, that he owned this other private yacht, and that he had properties to rent as well on Lanzarote, on mainland Spain. So he had sort of self-professed to have a lot of assets as such. So this case, which has been trundling along, and I definitely don't believe that any convicted criminal is going to actually hand over a full list of all their assets to a court.
No.
Without trying to hide things and whatever they can. But nonetheless, there were certain things that were really identifiable even through that. Of course, also, in years previous, I had identified villas in Mallorca, which Thomas Kavanagh owned one of them in particular. It was in a very luxurious resort there, and it was a waterside villa, and he holidayed there every year. And that was definitely tied up in the investigation. That property was identified at the time Trevor O'Neill was murdered in Mallorca. A tourist, an innocent guy. There was a hitman who was attempting to kill Jonathan Hutch at the time, who was randomly holidaying there at the same time. But during the investigation into that murder, it was identified that Bomber Kavanagh owned this property, which was worth, I mean, put a few zeros
Yeah, I mean, it
the
was
end
a
of
stunning,
200,000.
home, and obviously his close associate, Declan Brady, known as Mr. Nobody, had a villa very close to
Next door villa.
Next door.
Yeah.
So these are bricks and mortar assets, I suppose, and that property, but also the property in Tamworth. It's very clear that he owns them, and I suppose that would be the first port of call for a case like this.
Yeah, I mean, they were certainly the identifiable ones that you'd imagine that you didn't need the NCA, who have been doing a massive investigation and dismantling of the Kavanagh organisation, had all that detail as part of their investigations and their cooperation with international police forces and including the Irish. Of course, this case is coming to court later in the month. We'll hope to have some coverage of it. But the proceeds of crime case will be heard before the courts. And at that point, these assets will either be seized or, I don't know, can a deal be done in the same way as here? Because you can do settlements and you can offer up a certain amount in order to keep certain things. Undoubtedly, the Kavanaghs are going to want to keep the family home here.
Yeah, I mean, they can definitely, if they can show legitimate sources of income, which is always a complex thing, as we've seen again and again in cab cases where people do mix legitimate and illegitimate income and use one or the other to prop each other up. And cab, traditionally, we saw it just recently where with the Michael Gately case where although the home is being sold, described as his ex-partner now, Charlene Lamb, is going to get 12,000 out of that sale because she showed that she was able to put in that amount of legitimate income. So all of these things get considered.
Well, Kavanagh, of course, had a business, and he had TK Motors in Tamworth, which, while it was identified, and the motor industry in particular was identified as a way that he was laundering money, and that was brought up in the Criminal Assets Bureau cases in the High Court here in Dublin. It was also buying and selling cars. There was some business went through that business.
Yes.
You know what I mean? So they definitely had that business. And there was other bits of businesses the Kavanaghs had over there. And obviously Vickery will be claiming, his property interests were part of his property empire as such, because they were rentals, and he had actually got companies from memory in Spain, or his name was listed possibly as a director on certain companies. He had no previous history, Vickery,
No, he had no criminal history of note.
Nor Daniel Canning, and they were brother-in-law.
Yeah, so I mean, these are the complex things that get taken into account. Obviously, all of those men were in relationships or married, and their wives may have brought a certain amount of assets to the relationship, legitimately sourced, and that would also have to be taken into account. But Bomber Kavanagh, he would have bought that home in Tamworth at a time when he was probably very much under the radar in terms of the UK. He certainly seemed to think that he had a method of hiding illegitimate income through the car industry. In recent times, more and more criminals of his level are just not putting anything in their own names in countries like Ireland and the UK. They may be investing in properties overseas or cryptocurrency, but he was of that generation that felt that they could buy a home and that would be secure if they could show some sort of legitimate income source as well.
I think what we're going to see in this case is, going forward, I'm speculating somewhat, but I do believe we're going to see a lifestyle that will be a story in itself, because that was always the way with Thomas Bomber Kavanagh and his wife Joanne Byrne. And really they came on our radar initially in and around, the 2012-13 mark, because they were returning to Crumlin. Kavanagh's brother-in-laws were David, and the late David, and Liam Byrne, and his father-in-law was the late James Jaws Byrne, and they'd return to Raleigh Square in Crumlin in bigger and bigger and more expensive cars. And Bomber Kavanagh used to be described as Santa Claus, because he would be bringing these like really exceedingly expensive goods, gifts for people, anybody. He was very generous in his towards his wife. Joanne Byrne had a birthday party, a 40th birthday party in Vegas, and her and 20 gal pals or wherever were flown over to Vegas, and they were put up and they had a brilliant time. he traditionally holidayed over Christmas into January in Mexico and Cancun, and a lot of associates and everybody would go with him. That real Godfather style would have been him. And really super, super, I mean, you're talking these holidays were, what people would use to buy a home.
Totally. I mean, it's
Mallorca in the summer, and then obviously, we saw during his case in Ipswich Crown Court as well, sort of trips away to New York. Everybody's with him. He's the big man, the big boss, paying the bills.
Well, you spoke about that 2019 raid, which was probably the first time that the police had kicked in his door. Ultimately, he would be sentenced in relation to a stun gun that was found in the home, and the bigger charges came later on. But it really was the first domino to topple. But during that raid, what was taken was 100 pairs of designer shoes, 120 handbags, 26 pairs of Armani jeans, Hugo Boss.
I had that totally exaggerated. I had the jeans 150, did I?
And Canada Goose and Montclair jackets and expensive watches and jewellery.
26 pairs of jeans?
26 pairs of Armani jeans.
Just the same ones?
Well,
over and over again. They must have looked really good on someone that they kept buying them.
I don't know.
Tell me about the shoes again. I wrote the story, of course, but go on, just remind
36, me. Oh, sorry. It says 100 pairs of designer shoes.
100 pairs of shoes?
Yeah. And 40,000 sterling in cash.
Yeah.
Found stuffed in a sofa and I don't even know how to pronounce it, but Moschino, is it?
Moschino. How do you know how to pronounce that?
But how would I? I don't even know what it is.
It's difficult to pronounce.
Gucci and Chanel handbags. So and that was only a snapshot of that one time that.
Should we have pictures of that, some of those handbags?
Yeah.
How the money was stuffed down the back of the couches and everything. I mean, you get a little snapshots of these people's lives, and really the spend will give us something a little bit more than that. But Joanne Byrne, who has become the subject of interest in the UK media, she's been described as a gangster's moll, and she's featured in the Daily Mail.
As a kind of Carmela Soprano was I think the reference point that they use for as obviously Tony Soprano's wife in The Sopranos, the famous show.
Well, at one point when we were attempting to photograph and we were investigating Bomber Kavanagh in Birmingham, I recall that he was with her actually, which was why we were sort of in pursuit of them, and we were watching them during this particular day. And she arrived back to the house, having been in town, and like the bags were, the shopping bags was like something. I've never seen anything like it. I mean, how you could even carry them in. And this was obviously just a regular day's shopping.
Yeah.
So it was all, and look, everyone has their own style and all the rest of it, but there's
well, it's disposable income as well, you see, and people felt very comfortable spending that. So, like, things actually change over the last decade, and one of the ways in which cab cases and presumably other police forces across the world, like 20 years ago, that was never considered, but that has become more and more of a feature of cab, looking at that.
The spend on the holidays.
Yes, the spend on the holidays and the spend on the designer clothes. And it's introduced in court in a way that even in back 2019 wasn't as common. So people felt, certainly at a certain point in the history of criminality, you just spend all of that. Nobody's ever going to notice. And
no one's going to come after your shoes.
Nobody's going to come after your shoes or your holidays.
Or your jewellery or whatever.
And it's only when you get bricks and mortars and cars that you could be in trouble.
But it's like, I just, both Nicola O'Connor, who is the wife of Gary Vickery, and Joanne Byrne, the wife of Thomas Kavanagh, were in court in Ipswich when they were getting sentenced in relation to those big hefty drug charges. And you sort of, I suppose, as a journalist and everything, you have to give a bit of a benefit of the doubt that, maybe they didn't know. Maybe they were totally innocent of all that was going on. I mean, Bomber Kavanagh is believed to have headed up a lot of the murders that happened here in the aftermath of the Kinahan Hutch feud. He is an incredibly cruel, violent individual. There was a collection of weapons discovered in his bedroom, hidden in his locker, his bedside locker, under the bed, that would put a chill up your spine. But you're sort of looking over and you're going, Do these women lose touch completely with reality? And if there was a scintilla of them that believed that the car business was paying for all this lifestyle, who else do they know in the real world? Or do they stop hanging out with anyone in the real world and do they all just hang out together? Can afford that kind of a lifestyle?
Yeah, I mean,
even no matter, you can be hugely successful, but you can't probably afford. That's just a little snapshot that what was in those wardrobes, what was stuffed in those bags down the back of the couches, all those designer handbags. You add all that up and you're probably looking at that little bit alone that was just there. That's before they recycle or gets fed up because the things are cluttering or get sick of the Armani jeans look. Yeah. So that's all going to add up to at least $500,000.
Yeah, I mean, it's not a lifestyle that would be, it's a lifestyle that's associated with celebrities, really. I mean, you know, we've gone through the PDD trial and that's a totally different criminal sort of offence. But like, that's the sort of lifestyle these people are living, Thomas Bomber Kavanagh. And also, he has that kind of entourage in tow at all times, which if you look at business people don't. I mean, there are some billionaire business people like Elon Musk who have entourages and live that kind of lifestyle. But yeah, there's that. It is something like that.
But you sort of you're looking into a world that's so unfamiliar because for that, and that's what it's about. It's about not having one pair of Armani jeans, but 26 of them. The holidays, you know, the way too many pairs of shoes.
Yeah,
way too many pairs of shoes. And all of that is worth the murder, the risk of the drug importation, the people's lives that are being destroyed, and the fact that your husband is wheeled off to jail for 20 odd years going forward and is probably unlikely to be released until he's in his late 70s or 80s now. There's many people out there probably listening to this or watching saying, that wouldn't be a bad plan, would it, to get rid of him for 20 years and then wheel him back at that stage? But, you know, if you got fed up with your husband or your wife. But at the same time, you know, it's such a loss, isn't it? The jail time, losing the partner to the prison system, the children having to face through life with their father in jail. And that's before you even consider the morals of it all, or all those other people that you don't even know who have been touched by such tragedy and generations of which are going to be touched, all for that greed.
Which I actually think that bit is probably understandable, the greed bit. The bit that I don't fully understand is the belief that they must have had that they're going to get away with it forever.
Yeah.
So that's the bit I struggle to understand, because I can understand people getting caught up and they're in a world and they're in a subculture where things are acceptable that aren't acceptable in normal society. But I don't understand, you know, at some point, for example, Thomas Bomber Kavanagh must have had 10 million set aside, for example. And does he not think, get out now before it all goes wrong? Because nobody can go around spending money, being involved in plotting, being involved in violence and get away with it forever. It's just not going to happen. So that's the bit that I think that's the disconnect. Or do they just accept, well, maybe I will get caught or maybe I will get shot? No,
because I almost think sometimes that, so the person who's made all this money obviously is Thomas Bomber Kavanagh. Now he has used it to facilitate an extraordinary lifestyle for his family, but we're not suggesting that they were the ones who went out and made this money. He does. He provides for his family, but I'm not sure he has the interest in the money.
No.
I think it's almost an addiction to being, you know, that
the power
mafia boss.
Yeah, the power and the status. I mean, it's like definitely status drives organised criminals far more than money, if you ask me. I mean, to be a big shot is the ultimate aim behind it all. But, you know, I have talked to somebody before and I've heard other people say it on various forums. Oh, well, I just thought I'd be dead by the age of 40 or 28 or whatever, that they're deliberately knowing it could go wrong, but continuing to do it anyway because they're enjoying it. But somebody like Thomas Bomber Kavanagh, as he got into his late 40s, will have presumably made an awful lot of money and could have then walked away on top. But he obviously kept going.
The ego has been fed by it all, and then, that power trip, and he doesn't want to. He doesn't want to stop.
But so do they just block out the belief that it's inevitably going to be caught? Because
I think they feel untouchable. I think, anything you get away with empowers you. And, all the while, what the bit we can't see is that ego thing growing and growing and growing. I mean, bear in mind, he beat the system before. He walked away unscathed before, when his former business partner, James Mulvey, was taken down along with others. And Mulvey pursued, for 10 years or more before he was returned to the UK and jailed for 33 years, living a life on the run, which is chaotic and paranoid and very unpleasant. But Bomber has got away with that. Bomber has become this feared God-like figure within the criminal underworld. And he doesn't want to hand over. No. And, sometimes when you look at Christy Kinahan, what he became, what does he want to do? He wants to hand it down to the son, that succession thing. So there's a belief that they have reached a higher level of existence than others. And there's probably a bit of madness there.
Probably
that creeps into that.
Yeah, and look, no doubt some of these thoughts all go on in their unconscious minds rather than their conscious minds. Look, I suppose it shows you why I'm not a successful organised criminal. I might be greedy enough and ego.
Oh, I don't think so.
I might have enough of an ego, but I'm
greedy for
I'm too neurotic about the future to really make a good organised criminal.
Yeah. Anyway, look, we'll go and see what it is, but I think it's going to be shocking and sensational, probably, the spend that has gone on with probably both these individuals, and some of it will be revealed during the proceeds of crime hearing. But I think, at the heart of it will be that, really ugly.
Yeah, it's the desire to be, it's status, and this again and again, what the decisions that these people make. And you can see it in how they order murders as well, that a lot of them are status driven. So they'll order somebody to be shot because they were shown disrespect or some, not even for financial gain because somebody won't pay a debt, even if they, if there is a possibility of getting that money back in the future. And that's all a status thing.
Yeah.
And in order to maintain that status, and Bomber Kavanagh was very much like that. And you could even get a sense of that in the EncroChat messages that were exposed, where that sort of order demanding, domineering, it'll be fascinating.
Okay, well, we'll come back to it.
Thanks, Nicola.
I'm Nicola Tallant, and you're watching Crime World, a podcast about criminals, drugs, and the underworld in Ireland and across the globe. Make sure you subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you can be the first to watch all our latest episodes. You can also listen wherever you get your podcasts.